The mule. One morning, a mule who had too much to eat and too little to do began to think himself a very fine fellow indeed, and frisked about saying, "My father is undoubtedly a high-spirited horse, and I take after him entirely." But very soon afterwards he was put into the harness and compelled to go a very long way with a heavy load behind him. At the end of the day, exhausted by his unusual exertions, he said dejectedly to himself, "I must have been mistaken about my father. He can only have been an ass after all." The father and his daughters. A man had 2 daughters, one of whom he gave in marriage to a gardener and the other to a potter. After a time he thought he would go and see how they were getting on, and first he went to the gardener's wife. He asked her how she was, and how things were going with herself and her husband. She replied that on the whole they were doing very well, but she continued, "I do wish we could have some good heavy rain. The garden wants it badly." Then he went on to the potter's wife and made the same inquiries of her. She replied that she and her husband had nothing to complain of, but, she went on, "I do wish how I could have some nice dry weather to dry the pottery." Her father looked at her with humorous expressions on his face. "You want dry weather," he said, "and your sister wants rain. I was going to ask in my prayers that your wishes should be granted, but now it strikes me that I had better not refer to the subject." The Thief and the Innkeeper. A thief hired a room at an inn and stayed there some days on the lookout for something to steal. No opportunity, however, presented itself till one day, when there was a festival to be celebrated. The innkeeper appeared in a fine new coat and sat down before the door of the inn for an airing. The thief no sooner set eyes upon that coat than he longed to get possession of it. There was no business doing, so he went and took a seat by the side of the innkeeper and began talking to him. They conversed together for some time, and then the thief suddenly yawned and howled like a wolf. The innkeeper asked him in some concern that ailed him. The thief replied, "I will tell you about myself, sir, but first I must beg you to take charge of my clothes for me, for I intend to leave them with you. Why I have these fits of yawning I cannot tell. Maybe they are sent as a punishment for my misdeeds. But whatever the reason, the facts are that when I have yawned 3 times, I become a ravening wolf and fly at men's throats." As he finished speaking, he yawned a second time and howled again. As before, the innkeeper, believing every word he said, and terrified at the prospect of being confronted with a wolf, got up hastily and started to run indoors. But the thief caught him by the coat and tried to stop him, crying, "Stay, sir, stay, and take charge of my clothes, or else I shall never see them again." As he spoke, he opened his mouth and began to yawn a 3rd time. The innkeeper, mad with fear of being eaten by a wolf, slipped out of his coat, which remained in the other's hands, and bolted into the inn and locked the door behind him, and the thief then quietly stole off with his spoil. The Pack Ass and the Wild Ass. A wild ass who was wandering idly about one day came upon a pack ass lying at full length in a sunny spot and thoroughly enjoying himself. Going up to him, he said, "What a lucky beast you are! Your sleek coat shows how well you live. How I envy you." Not long after, the wild ass saw his acquaintance again, but this time he was carrying a heavy load, and his driver was following behind and beating him with a thick stick. "Ah, my friend," said the wild ass, "I don't envy you any more, for I see you pay dear for your comforts, advantages that are dearly brought upon doubtful beings."